Picture this. It's 1287, and you're standing in the muddy streets of London. The smell hits you first. A cocktail of horse manure, rotting vegetables, and something that might be a dead cat. Or maybe that's just the leather tanner next door. You need work, desperately. Your stomach has been staging protests for 3 days straight, and your last coin went to a loaf of bread that was harder than the stone it was baked on. You could try your luck as a day laborer, sure, but those guys usually end up with broken backs by 30 and dead by 35. No, you need something better. You need to join a guild. Tonight we're diving into medieval guilds, the first network systems. Forget everything Hollywood told you about medieval life being all knights and fair maidens. This is the real story of how ordinary people built the first professional networks. And trust me, LinkedIn has nothing on these guys. So before you get too comfortable, hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of deep dive, and let me know in the comments what your medieval job would be. Now dim the lights, maybe grab some ale if you've got it, and let's jump in. You see that building across the street, the one with actual glass windows while you're still using oiled cloth? That's the Goldsmith Guild Hall. Inside, men in fine wool tunics are discussing import taxes and the latest techniques for testing gold purity. They speak in hushed tones about their trade secrets, recipes passed down through generations like sacred texts. These aren't just craftsmen, they're the tech bros of the medieval world, except instead of disrupting industries with apps, they're literally controlling entire economies with their monopolies. And you, my friend, you're about to try to break into this exclusive club. Good luck with that. The guild system wasn't just about making things. It was about power, protection, and keeping everyone else out. Think of it as a medieval franchise system mixed with the mafia, but with better hats and more religious holidays. Every major city had dozens of these guilds. Bakers, brewers, blacksmiths, merchants. Even the guys who cleaned out your privy had their own guild. That last one was actually pretty lucrative, by the way. Human waste was valuable for tanning leather and making gunpowder. Nothing says career advancement like literally dealing with other people's crap. But here is the thing nobody tells you about medieval guilds. They were the Silicon Valley of their time. Innovation, standardization, quality control, these concepts didn't just appear during the Industrial Revolution. They were being hammered out, sometimes literally, in guild workshops 500 years earlier. These organizations created the first real professional networks, complete with their own social media, which was basically gossiping at the tavern, and their own version of LinkedIn endorsements, which involved not getting thrown out for making terrible shoes. The guilds controlled everything. Want to sell bread in this town? Better be in the Baker's Guild or prepare to have your ovens mysteriously destroyed. Want to make shoes? The Cordwainers Guild would like a word, and that word is no, unless you pay up and train for 7 years. They had more regulations than a modern HOA, and were about as forgiving. You think your job has too many meetings? These guys had mandatory attendance at guild meetings, religious processions, mystery plays, feast days, and don't even get me started on the fines. Miss a meeting, that's a fine. Make substandard products. Fine. Look at the guild master funny. Believe it or not, also a fine. The power these guilds wielded was absolutely insane. They controlled prices, wages, working hours, and even who could marry whom. Yeah, you heard that right. Many guilds had rules about who members could marry, because God forbid a master craftsman's daughter marry beneath her station. It was like Tinder, but your matches were pre-approved by a committee of old men who smelled like cheese and disappointment. They even controlled what you could wear. Sumptuary laws meant that even if you had the money, you couldn't dress above your station. That purple silk you've been eyeing, sorry, that's for nobility only. You get brown wool and you'll like it. Or at least pretend to like it, because complaining was probably finable too. But let's talk about the real genius of the guild system, the networking. These weren't just local organizations. They had connections across Europe, creating the first international business networks. A merchant guild member in London could write a letter of introduction for you to his counterpart in Venice, and suddenly doors would open. It was like having a corporate expense account and a diplomatic passport rolled into one, except instead of airline miles, you accumulated favors and political capital. The guild hall itself was the medieval equivalent of a co-working space, country club, and courthouse all rolled into one. Members would gather here to settle disputes, because taking your business partner to actual court was for peasants. The guild would handle it internally, judge, jury, and sometimes executioner, though usually that just meant expulsion, not actual death. Usually, inside these halls, knowledge was power, and it was carefully guarded. Trade secrets were protected more fiercely than state secrets. The Venetian Glassmakers Guild literally imprisoned their members on the island of Murano to prevent them from leaving and sharing their techniques. Try explaining that work-from-home policy to modern employees. Sorry, Dave, you need to live at the office forever. It's for trade secret protection. The apprenticeship system was basically unpaid internship on steroids. 7 years was the standard, though some crafts required longer. During this time you lived with your master, worked from dawn to dusk, and in return got food, lodging, and the occasional beating when you messed up, which you would, frequently, because learning to make a perfect horseshoe, while some guy screams at you in Middle English, is harder than it sounds. Your master controlled everything about your life: when you woke up, what you ate, who you could socialize with, even whether you could grow a beard. Some guilds had specific rules about apprentice grooming, because apparently nothing says professional development like regulated facial hair. And dating, forget about it. Most apprenticeship contracts specifically forbade marriage, or even casual relationships. The reasoning was that you needed to focus on your craft, but really it was about control. Can't have apprentices getting distracted by love when there are horseshoes to make, and leather to tan. The worst part, you were basically property. Your master could sell your contract to another master, loan you out to work on projects, or extend your apprenticeship if he felt you weren't ready. Imagine your unpaid internship, but your boss could literally trade you to another company like a baseball card. Oh, and running away. That would get you branded as a runaway apprentice, basically the medieval equivalent of having terrible credit. No other master would take you, and working outside the guild system was illegal. You were stuck, but if you survived, if you made it through those 7 years of hell, you became a journeyman. Finally you could earn wages, travel, see the world, or at least see other muddy cities that smelled slightly different from your muddy city. This was your chance to learn from other masters, perfect your craft, and save up enough money to maybe, possibly, if the stars aligned and the guild approved, become a master yourself. Becoming a master was like trying to get tenure at a university, except with more politics and the occasional knife fight. First you needed to create a masterpiece. Literally. This wasn't just any product. It had to be perfect, innovative, and prove you had completely mastered your craft. Blacksmiths might forge an intricate piece of armor. Goldsmiths would create elaborate chalices. Bakers, well, they baked really impressive bread. Look, not every masterpiece could be sexy. The guild masters would examine your work with the intensity of Gordon Ramsay judging a souffle. Every detail was scrutinized. One slight imperfection, and you were sent back to journeyman status, sometimes for years. Some poor souls tried 5, 6, 7 times before giving up and accepting their fate as eternal journeymen. The guild equivalent of ABD, all but degree. But even if your masterpiece was approved, you weren't done. You needed to pay an entrance fee that would make modern student loans look reasonable. We're talking years of savings, often requiring loans from family, friends, or, if you were desperate, the medieval equivalent of loan sharks. And these guys didn't just break your legs if you didn't pay. They had much more creative methods involving hot pokers and your tender bits. Then came the feast. Oh yes, you had to throw a massive party for all the guild members. Not just drinks and some cheese. We're talking multiple courses, entertainment, enough ale to drown a horse, and gifts for the senior members. It was like a wedding reception where everyone hated you and was actively looking for reasons to reject your application. Some aspiring masters went bankrupt just from the feast alone. The politics involved would make House of Cards look like a kids' show. You needed sponsors within the guild, usually masters who would vouch for your character and skill, but these sponsors wanted something in return. Maybe you'd work for them at reduced wages. Maybe you'd marry their ugly daughter. Maybe you'd support them in guild elections. Everything was transactional, and if you didn't play the game, you didn't become a master. And here's the really messed up part. Even after jumping through all these hoops, the guild could still reject you if they felt there were too many masters already. They artificially limited membership to keep wages high and competition low. It was market manipulation that would make modern cartels jealous. Your masterpiece could be perfect, your feast legendary, your sponsors powerful, and they could still say, "Sorry, we have enough shoemakers this decade. Try again later." For those who made it though, life was good, really good. Masters had monopolistic control over their trade in their city. They could take apprentices, basically free labor for 7 years. They could vote in guild elections and city politics. They had social status, legal protection, and economic security. They were the middle class in a world that basically only had ultra-rich and dirt poor. But the real power was in the network. Guild membership meant you were part of something bigger. If you traveled to another city, the local guild would help you find lodging and work. If you were robbed on the road, your guild would fund your recovery. If you died, they would pay for your funeral and support your widow. It was socialism, but only for the chosen few who could afford the entrance fee. These networks stretched across continents. Italian banking guilds had representatives in London, Paris, and Constantinople. Hanseatic League merchants controlled trade from Norway to Russia. Information, techniques, and innovations spread through these networks faster than you might think. A new dyeing technique discovered in Florence could be known in Bruges within months, but only to guild members. Everyone else could go pound sand. The guild system was LinkedIn, Facebook, Amazon, and the Supreme Court all rolled into one medieval package. They created the first professional standards, the first international trade networks, the first quality control systems, and the first worker protections. They also created massive inequality, stifled competition, and made social mobility about as likely as surviving the plague. Actually, surviving the plague might have been easier. Let's talk about your first day as a guild apprentice. It's 4 in the morning. Yes, 4. Your master just kicked you awake. Literally, because alarm clocks won't exist for another 300 years, and roosters are unreliable. Your bed, if we can call it that, is a straw mattress in the workshop corner that you share with 2 other apprentices, and probably several families of rats. The rats are actually the best roommates. They don't snore as loud as Thomas, and they don't steal your bread like William. You stumble to your feet, still wearing yesterday's clothes, because you only own 2 sets, and the other one is even dirtier. First task of the day, starting the fire. Not just any fire, the workshop fire that must never ever go out. If it does, your master loses a full day of work waiting for it to get hot enough again. And guess whose hide will be used to stoke it back up? Yours. so you carefully feed it wood, not too much or it blazes and wastes fuel, not too little or it dies. It's an art form that took you 3 months and countless beatings to master. While the fire's building, you sweep the workshop, and when I say sweep, I mean you move approximately 3 tons of metal shavings, wood chips, and mysterious substances that could be dried glue or could be something that leaked from the horse stabled next door. Your back already hurts and the sun isn't even up yet. The broom is basically a bundle of twigs that sheds more than it sweeps, so this takes about an hour. By 5:30 your master appears, usually hungover from the guild meeting last night, where important business was discussed, like whether John's new apprentice was too tall and therefore unfair competition. He grunts at you, which is actually a good sign. Silence means he's thinking of new ways to make your life miserable. He inspects your work, finds invisible dust in corners that you swear you cleaned, and assigns you a penalty task, usually something involving the privy or the pig pen out back. Breakfast is at 6, if you can call it breakfast. It's pottage, which is basically whatever vegetables were too rotten to sell yesterday, boiled into submission with some barley. If you're lucky, there's a hint of bacon fat for flavor. If you're not lucky, it's just grey mush that tastes like disappointment and cabbage. You have exactly 5 minutes to eat, because customers start arriving at 6:15, and God help you if you're not ready. Your first real task of the day depends on your trade. If you're with a blacksmith, you're working the bellows, pumping air into the forge for hours until your arms feel like they might actually fall off. The heat is unbearable. Summer or winter doesn't matter when you're standing next to a fire hot enough to melt iron. Sweat pours down your face, stinging your eyes, but you can't stop pumping because the metal needs consistent heat. One break in rhythm, and the piece is ruined, and guess who pays for ruined metal? Not you directly, because you don't have any money, but your master will find creative ways to make you suffer. Maybe you'll eat nothing but bread crusts for a week. Maybe you'll sleep in the actual forge to make sure it stays hot all night. Maybe he'll loan you to the tanner down the street, and trust me, you do not want to work with the tanner. That job involves urine, feces and rotting flesh, and those are the pleasant parts. If you're with a goldsmith, your job is slightly less physically demanding, but requires insane precision. You're mixing acids that can burn through skin, working with mercury that will slowly drive you mad, though nobody knows that yet, and handling gold leaf so thin that breathing wrong destroys hours of work. One mistake with the acids and you lose fingers. One mistake with the measurements, and you lose gold, which is somehow worse than losing fingers in your master's eyes. By midday, you've already been working for 7 hours, and your master announces it's time for dinner. That's right. Dinner is at noon because supper is the evening meal, and breakfast was that sad pottage situation. Dinner is the main meal of the day, and as an apprentice, you don't eat until everyone else is served. You stand behind your master's chair, refilling his ale, cutting his meat, and trying not to drool as he eats an actual piece of chicken, while you know you're getting the neck and feet later. The guild has rules about how masters must feed apprentices. Technically, they're supposed to provide adequate nutrition, but adequate is subjective, and nobody's checking whether that bread is fresh or that cheese isn't moving on its own. Your master could feed you the same thing every day for 7 years, and as long as you don't actually die of scurvy, it's considered adequate. During dinner, your master discusses business with his wife, who actually runs half the operation, but can't officially be in the guild because she has the wrong genitals. She keeps the books, manages the household, supervises the younger apprentices, and somehow maintains her sanity while living with anywhere from 3 to 10 males of varying ages and hygiene standards. She eyes you constantly, making sure you don't pocket any food or slack off while serving. She's scarier than your master, because while he might beat you, she controls whether you get any vegetables in your pottage tomorrow. After dinner, the real learning begins. If you're lucky, for the first year you mostly just watch and fetch things. Hold this, get that, no, not that one, the other one, no, the other one. Are you stupid? Your master demonstrates techniques while explaining absolutely nothing, because why would he make it easy? You're supposed to learn by observation, osmosis, and the occasional beating when you inevitably mess up trying to copy what you saw. By year 3, you might actually get to touch the tools. By year 5, you might make something that doesn't immediately get thrown into the scrap pile. By year 7, if you've survived, you might actually be competent, but probably not, according to your master, who reminds you daily that apprentices these days are soft and lazy, not like when he was young and had to walk uphill both ways to the guild hall in the snow. The workshop is a dangerous place, and workplace safety is about 3 centuries away from being invented. That forge fire, no protective equipment, those chemicals, no ventilation, that saw that's basically a piece of sharp metal attached to a stick, no guards, lose a finger.
Shay.
Congratulations, you just became less valuable. Lose an eye, better learn to work with one. Die, your master has to find a new apprentice, which is inconvenient, so try not to. Every tool is trying to kill you. The grinding wheel could grab your sleeve and pull your arm in. The acids could splash and blind you. The hammer could bounce wrong and cave in your skull, and that's assuming you're working with a careful master. Some are drunk by noon, some have tempers that make Gordon Ramsay look like Mr. Rogers, some just don't care if you live or die, as long as the work gets done, but the real danger isn't the tools or the chemicals, it's the other apprentices. You're competing for your master's attention, for the better tasks, for the extra piece of bread at dinner.
Shay.
Thomas, who sleeps next to you, would absolutely throw you under the cart if it meant he got to work on the fancy commission, instead of grinding pigments all day. William already tried to blame you for the broken mold last week. You survived that accusation. Barely, but you know he's planning something else. It's Game of Thrones, but everyone's 12 and armed with potentially lethal medieval tools. Evenings in the workshop are when things get really interesting. After the customers leave and the main work is done, your master might actually teach you something. Or he might get drunk and tell you stories about his apprenticeship, which was definitely harder than yours, featuring masters who were definitely stricter and jobs that were definitely more difficult. You nod and agree because disagreeing means tomorrow's tasks will somehow be even worse than usual. If it's a guild meeting night, your master leaves and puts the senior apprentice in charge. This is either great or terrible, no in between. Great means you might actually get to practice techniques without someone screaming at you. Terrible means the senior apprentice, drunk on his tiny amount of power, makes you do all his work while he sneaks off to the tavern. Either way, you're working until at least 9 at night, when the city curfew bell rings and everyone has to be indoors or risk arrest. Saturdays are half days, technically. You only work until sunset instead of past it. This is your free time, except it's not free and it's not really yours. You need to attend church because the guild requires it and they have spies everywhere. You need to wash your clothes, or at least beat them against rocks until they're slightly less disgusting. You need to maintain your tools, assuming you're advanced enough to have any, and if you're really lucky, you might get an hour to yourself. What do you do with that precious hour? Some apprentices gamble, which is illegal, but everyone does it anyway. Some sneak off to the taverns, also illegal for apprentices. Some try to court the serving girls, definitely illegal and punishable by extension of your apprenticeship. The smart ones practice their craft in secret, trying to get ahead, trying to be the one the master notices and maybe treats slightly less terribly. Sunday is the Lord's Day, which means you spend it in church, at religious festivals, or watching mystery plays put on by the guilds. These plays are supposedly about Bible stories, but are really excuses for guilds to show off. The Blacksmiths Guild does the harrowing of hell with real fire effects. The Bakers Guild does the Last Supper with actual bread multiplication tricks. The goldsmiths do the Three Wise Men with enough fake gold to make everyone remember who has the real money in this town. You watch from the back with the other apprentices, trying not to fall asleep because you've been up since 4 in the morning for 6 days straight. The social hierarchy at these events is rigid. Masters and their families get the good spots. Journeymen stand behind them. Apprentices are lucky if they can see anything at all. You're literally at the bottom of the medieval corporate ladder, and everyone makes sure you know it. But here is the thing they don't tell you about apprenticeships. Sometimes, rarely, you get a good master. Someone who actually wants to teach, who sees potential in you, who remembers being 14 and terrified and trying not to mess up. These masters still work you hard, still discipline you when needed, but they also explain why you're doing things. They show you tricks that took them decades to learn. They introduce you to other masters as their promising apprentice instead of their useless burden. If you get one of these masters, your 7 years might actually teach you something beyond endurance and creative swearing. The workshop becomes less of a prison and more of a school. The senior apprentices become older brothers instead of tormentors. The master's wife might slip you extra food when you're growing and constantly hungry. The whole experience becomes what it was supposed to be, education in a craft that could support you for life. But let's be real. Most masters aren't like that. Most are in it for the free labor, teaching you just enough to be useful, but not enough to be competition. They'll extend your apprenticeship for minor infractions, loan you out to their friends for extra income, and generally make your life miserable because they can, and because their master did it to them. Now that you've survived your apprenticeship, let's talk about the journey to journeyman. See what I did there? Journeyman. The medieval folks loved their on-the-nose naming conventions. You've just spent 7 years in hell, and your reward is freedom to work for wages. Except not really, because nothing in the guild system is ever that simple. The ceremony marking your transition from apprentice to journeyman is both a celebration and a humiliation. You stand before the guild assembly while your master presents your work from the past 7 years. Every mistake you've ever made is discussed in detail. Remember that horseshoe you made in year 3 that was slightly asymmetrical. They remember. That time you accidentally used the wrong type of wood for a handle. It's brought up. That incident with the acid and the cat. Oh, they definitely discuss that. Usually with dramatic reenactments. But if you've survived all that, if your master grudgingly admits you're competent, you take the journeyman's oath. You swear to uphold guild standards, protect trade secrets, and not undercut other members' prices. You also swear fealty to the guild master, the city, the king, God, and probably a few saints thrown in for good measure. It's like signing a non-compete agreement, terms of service and loyalty oath all at once. Except breaking it doesn't just mean a lawsuit. It means exile, branded hands, or if you've really annoyed them, a creative punishment involving public humiliation and possibly pigs. Your first day as a journeyman is surreal. You wake up and realize you can leave. Just walk out the door. No one can stop you. After 7 years of needing permission to breathe, you can go wherever you want. So naturally, you go to the guild hall to register for work because you need money and have exactly 0 coins to your name. The guild operates basically like a temp agency from hell. Masters post jobs they need done, and journeymen bid for them. Except the bidding is rigged. The masters collude to keep wages low, and if you complain, you're blacklisted faster than you can say workers' rights. Your first job might be helping a master with a big commission, or it might be fixing the roof of the guild hall, while the masters drink below and critique your technique. The journeyman years are supposed to be about perfecting your craft and learning from different masters. In reality, they're about being exploited by different masters in exciting new ways. One week you're working for a master who pays in food and accommodation, which means sleeping in his workshop and eating his leftovers. The next week you're working for one who pays in coin, but deducts rent, tool usage, material costs, breathing fees, and somehow you end up owing him money. But the real education happens on the road. As a journeyman, you're expected to travel, to work in different cities, learn different techniques. This is called the Journeyman's Wanderschaft, and it's basically backpacking through Europe. If backpacking meant walking hundreds of miles in handmade shoes while carrying all your possessions and hoping you don't get murdered by bandits, you can just show up in a new city and start working though. First you need to present yourself to the local guild. They examine your papers, which better be in order, or you're sleeping outside the city walls tonight. They test your skills, usually by making you perform your craft, while several masters stand around telling you you're doing it wrong. If they approve, and that's a big if, they assign you to a master who needs help. The life of a traveling journeyman is basically medieval couch surfing with a high chance of death. You walk from city to city, sometimes hundreds of miles, carrying everything you own in a pack. Your possessions include your tools, if you can afford them, one change of clothes, if you're fancy, and a letter of recommendation from your guild that you guard with your life, because without it, you're just a vagrant with suspicious calluses. The roads between cities are basically mud tracks through forests full of bandits, wolves, and worse, other journeymen who might see you as competition. You travel in groups when possible, but sometimes it's just you, your walking stick that doubles as a weapon, and prayers to whatever saint protects idiots walking alone through bandit country. When you finally reach a new city, the first challenge is getting through the gates. City guards are suspicious of everyone, especially young men with tools who claim to be craftsmen. They want to see your papers, your guild seal, proof you're not a spy, a thief, or worst of all, a Protestant. This is still a few centuries before the Reformation, but they're suspicious anyway. Once inside, you find the guild hall of your craft. Every city has different rules, different techniques, different politics. The Parisian goldsmiths do things completely differently from the Venetian ones. The German blacksmiths think the English ones are barbarians who don't know proper steel. The English blacksmiths think the Germans are pretentious assholes who overcomplicate everything. They're both right. You present yourself to the guildmaster, who looks you up and down like you're livestock at market. He asks about your training, your master, your experience. Then comes the test. It's always a test. Make this joint, forge this nail, bake this bread, whatever your craft. They want to see if you're actually skilled or if your recommendation letter is creative fiction. If you pass, you're assigned to a local master who needs temporary help. This master might be amazing, teaching you techniques your original master never knew, or he might be a disaster who only takes journeymen because no local will work for him anymore. You have no choice. You work for whoever will take you, learn what you can and move on. The pay varies wildly. Some cities have strong guilds that enforce minimum wages. Others are basically free for alls where masters pay in exposure and expired cheese. You might earn enough to save for your future masterpiece, or you might barely earn enough to eat. Usually it's the latter, because the universe hates journeymen almost as much as it hates apprentices. Living arrangements are equally variable. Good masters provide a bed in the workshop. Bad ones point to a corner and suggest you make friends with the rats. Some journeymen rent rooms in boarding houses that make modern hostels look like 5-star hotels. We're talking 6 men to a room, bedbugs that have bedbugs, and a landlady who waters the ale and charges extra for breathing. The work itself is educational though. Every master has tricks, techniques passed down through generations or stolen from competitors. You learn that the Milanese armourers use a specific type of coal that makes steel harder. The Flemish weavers have a way of treating wool that makes it softer. The Spanish leather workers use a tanning method that produces incredible colours. You absorb it all, memorize it all, because this knowledge is your real payment. The social life of a journeyman is complicated. You're not an apprentice anymore, so you have some freedom, but you're not a master, so you have no real status. You're in limbo, too old to hang out with the apprentices, too young and poor to socialize with the masters. You exist in this weird middle space where everyone either ignores you or wants something from you. The local journeymen see you as competition. There's only so much work to go around, and every traveling journeyman who shows up means less for them. They might be polite to your face, but they're absolutely talking trash about your technique behind your back and trying to sabotage your work when they can. That joint that mysteriously failed, that leather that got ruined, probably not accidents. But you can't be a complete loner. You need allies, contacts, people who will vouch for you in the next city. So you do what humans have always done to build relationships. You drink together. The taverns are full of journeymen after work, spending what little money they have on ale and comparing notes about which masters are decent and which ones should be avoided like the plague. Actually, you should avoid the plague too, but that's harder. These tavern sessions are where real learning happens. You hear about new techniques, new markets, which cities are hiring, which ones are in decline. Someone mentions that Augsburg is building a new cathedral and needs skilled stoneworkers. Another says the Hanseatic League is recruiting shipbuilders in Hamburg. Information is currency, and journeymen trade it like merchants trade spices. Romance as a journeyman is theoretically possible, but practically impossible. You have no money, no permanent residence, and no prospects until you become a master, which might be never. What father is going to let his daughter marry someone who might leave town next week? What woman is going to wait years while you save enough to attempt your masterpiece? Some journeymen have relationships with serving girls, washerwomen, or other working-class women who understand the struggle. But these relationships are usually brief, ending when you move to the next city, or when her father finds out and threatens you with creative violence. The smart journeymen focus on the work, on learning, on saving every penny for their eventual masterpiece attempt. The years on the road are an investment in your future. Every technique you learn, every contact you make, every coin you save brings you closer to master status. But it's lonely. You spend years moving from city to city, never belonging anywhere, always the outsider. You watch other people your age getting married, having children, building lives, while you're still sleeping in workshops and eating bread that could double as a weapon. Some journeymen never make it to master. They spend their entire lives in this limbo, working for wages, moving from job to job, always dreaming of the masterpiece they'll make someday. They become permanent journeymen, a cautionary tale told to apprentices. Work hard, or you'll end up like old Heinrich, 45 years old, and still asking masters for work. The successful journeymen are the ones who play the long game. They cultivate relationships with powerful masters who might sponsor them later. They save religiously, hiding coins in their shoes, their belt, anywhere thieves might not look. They practice in secret, perfecting techniques for their eventual masterpiece. They're planning their return, their triumph, their elevation to master status. After 3 to 5 years on the road, if you've survived bandits, plague, bad food, worse ale, and the occasional knife fight with other journeymen, you might have enough saved to return home and attempt your masterpiece. You've learned from masters across the continent, stolen their secrets, improved on their techniques. You're ready, or at least you think you are. Let's talk about what guild life was really like once you finally made it as a master. You've survived the apprenticeship, travelled as a journeyman, created your masterpiece, thrown your feast, and paid your fees. You're expecting respect, wealth, and power. What you get is guild politics that make modern office drama look like a kindergarten playground dispute. Your first guild meeting as a full master is an education in medieval bureaucracy. The guild hall, which looked so impressive when you were an apprentice, now reveals itself as what it really is, a room full of middle-aged men arguing about everything. The meeting starts 3 hours late because the guild master is recovering from last night's wine, and half the members are still arguing about last month's decision to raise the apprentice registration fee by 2 pennies. The agenda is 17 items long. First item, someone used inferior thread in their doublets and must be fined. This takes an hour to discuss, with testimonies from 3 witnesses, examination of the evidence, which is literally a shirt, and heated debate about what constitutes inferior. Second item, the Bakers Guild is encroaching on our territory by selling meat pies. This is clearly unacceptable and means war. Not actual war, but economic war, which involves a lot of strongly worded letters and threats to involve the mayor. You sit there, in your designated spot based on when you became a master, realizing that you've traded 7 years of physical labor for endless meetings about thread quality and pie jurisdiction. This is your life now. Every week, sometimes twice a week, sitting in this hall, while grown men argue about things that seemed important 500 years ago and really don't matter now. But you have to care, because this is your livelihood. The guild controls everything. They set the prices you can charge, the hours you can work, the number of apprentices you can take. They decide if your products meet standards, if your workshop passes inspection, if your wife can sell goods when you're sick. One wrong vote, one enemy on the council, and your business could be destroyed. So you play the game, you vote with the powerful masters even when they're obviously wrong. You contribute to the guild funds even when you can barely feed your family. You attend every feast, every religious procession, every ceremonial function, and you pretend to enjoy it. You smile when the guildmaster makes the same joke he's been making for 15 years. You laugh when his son, who has the intellectual capacity of a particularly dim cabbage, is fast-tracked to master status. The real power in the guild isn't held by all masters equally. Oh no, that would be too simple. There's the inner circle, usually the oldest, richest members who've been masters since before you were born. They make the real decisions in private meetings at the guildmaster's house, then present them to the General Assembly as suggestions that everyone knows are actually commands. Below them are the regular masters, like you, who have a vote but not a voice. You can agree or disagree, but disagreeing too often gets you labeled as difficult. Your workshop might fail inspection next month. Your apprentice might suddenly be found lacking and sent back. Your wife might be banned from selling at the market. The message is clear: conform or suffer. The economics of being a guildmaster are not what you expected. Sure, you have a monopoly on your craft in the city, but that monopoly comes with so many strings attached, you might as well be a marionette. The guild sets maximum prices to prevent gouging, but also minimum prices to prevent undercutting. You can innovate too much, because that would be unfair to other masters. You can work too hard, because that would also be unfair. Everything must be equal, except it's not equal at all, because the established masters have all the good customers locked up with relationships going back generations. Your workshop is your entire world now. It's your business, your home, and your prison. You wake up there, work there, eat there, and eventually you'll probably die there. If you're lucky, you inherited it from your master. If not, you're renting, and the rent is whatever the landlord thinks he can squeeze from you. The workshop must meet guild standards, which change whenever the guild needs more money for its latest project, usually a bigger guild hall or another statue of Saint Eligius, patron saint of metalworkers, and apparently also patron saint of unnecessary expenses. You need tools, good ones, which cost more than most people make in a year. You need materials which the guild buys in bulk and sells to you at a markup because that's another way they make money. You need to maintain appearances because customers judge you by your workshop. Too shabby and you're clearly unsuccessful. Too nice and you're clearly overcharging. It's a balance as delicate as the gold leaf you're working with. Your apprentices are theoretically free labor, but they're also free to be incompetent, destructive, and occasionally criminal. That kid you just took on. He might be the next master craftsman, or he might burn down your workshop trying to cook an egg. You're responsible for him either way. If he commits a crime, you pay the fine. If he gets a girl pregnant, guess who's negotiating with her father? If he runs away, you're out 7 years of training investment, and you have to take apprentices. The guild requires it. It's part of your obligation to the craft, to pass on knowledge to the next generation. Also, the registration fees go to the guild, so they have a vested interest in keeping the apprentice pipeline flowing. You might not want a 14-year-old living in your house, eating your food, and generally making your life complicated, but too bad, take the kid or face guild censure. Your wife, if you have one, is basically running a parallel business that officially doesn't exist. She keeps your books because you never learned to write properly. She manages the household, which includes feeding anywhere from 5 to 15 people, depending on how many apprentices and journeymen you have. She might also be producing textiles, brewing ale, or running any number of side businesses that technically require guild membership, but everyone pretends not to notice, because the economy would collapse without women's unpaid and unrecognized labor. Competition between masters is fierce, but has to appear friendly. You're all brothers in the guild, after all. Brothers who would gladly steal each other's customers, sabotage each other's work, and spread rumors about each other's products. But you have to smile and drink together at guild functions. Pretend you don't know that Thomas has been telling people your silver isn't pure, while you casually mention that his apprentice was seen at the brothel, which calls his moral authority into question. The daily reality of running a guild workshop is a masterclass in medieval middle management. You're up before dawn, not because you have to be any more, but because your apprentices need supervision and your journeymen need direction. You've become the person you swore you'd never be, the master who complains about lazy apprentices while conveniently forgetting you once spent an entire afternoon hiding in the privy to avoid work. Your customer base is divided into 3 categories. First, the nobility and wealthy merchants, who pay well but slowly, sometimes taking years to settle accounts. You can refuse them because they have power, and you can pressure them for payment because they have swords. Second, the middle tier of smaller merchants and successful craftsmen who pay reasonably and regularly but haggle over every penny. Third, the common folk who pay immediately but in small amounts and sometimes in chickens or dubious IOUs. Quality control is your constant nightmare. Every piece that leaves your workshop has your mark on it, literally. If it fails, if it breaks, if it turns out to be substandard, it's not just a refund issue, it's a guild investigation. They'll examine your entire operation, question your methods, possibly fine you, definitely humiliate you in front of the assembly. One bad product can destroy a reputation built over decades, so you obsess over every detail, check every piece multiple times, and slowly develop the kind of anxiety that would require therapy if therapy existed. But instead, you just drink more ale and yell at apprentices. The social obligations of guild membership are endless. There's the feast of your patron saint, mandatory attendance and contribution required. There's the Guildmaster's birthday, where you're expected to give a gift that shows respect but not ambition. There's the annual mystery play, where your guild performs the same biblical scene you've been doing for 50 years, and you have to pretend the Baker's Guild's version of the Last Supper isn't better than your nativity. There are funerals, constantly, medieval life expectancy being what it is. Someone is always dying, and guild members must attend, process, and contribute to the widow's fund. You spend more time in funeral processions than actually working some weeks. Then there are the weddings, baptisms, and celebrations of new masters, all requiring gifts, presents, and enthusiastic participation, even when you'd rather be literally anywhere else. The guild's relationship with the city government is complicated. Technically you're independent. Realistically, you're as independent as a teenager living in their parents' basement. The city can tax you, regulate you, conscript you for city defense, and generally make your life miserable if you don't play ball. The mayor needs the guilds for tax revenue and economic stability, but he also resents your power and constantly tries to limit it. You're required to serve on city watch, which means spending nights patrolling the streets with a lantern and a stick, pretending you'd actually do something if you encountered real criminals. You're conscripted for public works, building walls, digging ditches, whatever the city needs. It's presented as civic duty, but it's really just free labor with the threat of guild expulsion if you refuse. Your success as a master ultimately depends not on your skill, though that helps, but on your ability to navigate the political, social, and economic maze of guild life. You need to be skilled enough to maintain reputation, political enough to avoid making enemies, social enough to build connections, and ruthless enough to survive in a system designed to maintain the status quo. The most successful masters are the ones who understand that the guild system isn't about excellence or innovation. It's about conformity, stability, and keeping everyone in their designated place. You succeed by not rocking the boat, by being good but not too good, by innovative but not too innovative, by being prosperous but not too prosperous. Now let's dive into the absolutely insane world of guild law and justice. Forget everything you know about modern legal systems. Guild justice was like Judge Judy meets Game of Thrones meets a really dysfunctional homeowners association. The guild court convened whenever someone broke the rules, which was basically every other Tuesday, because the rules were so numerous and specific that breathing wrong could probably violate at least 3 of them. Picture this. You're hauled before the guild court because your apprentice was seen buying wool from a non-guild member. Doesn't matter that it was for his personal use to darn his socks. Doesn't matter that guild wool costs 3 times as much. Rules are rules, and you're about to learn exactly how petty medieval justice could be. The guild hall transforms into a courtroom, if you can call it that. The guild master sits in his big chair, trying to look imposing despite everyone knowing he was passed out drunk in the tavern last night. The senior masters arrange themselves by seniority, each one remembering every slight, every perceived insult, every time you might have looked at them funny. This is their chance for revenge, disguised as justice. The accused, that's you, stands in the center like a performer in the world's worst theater. No lawyer, because lawyers are for real courts. No jury of your peers, because your peers are the ones judging you. No presumption of innocence, because why would there be? If you're here, you probably did something wrong, and if you didn't, well, you probably did something else wrong that they haven't caught yet. The evidence phase is particularly entertaining. Witness testimony is given, and by testimony I mean gossip elevated to legal status. Martha saw your apprentice with the wool. She didn't actually see him buy it, but he was carrying it, and where else would he get wool? Case closed. Unless you can prove otherwise, which involves finding your own witnesses who are willing to testify on your behalf and risk annoying the guild leadership. Good luck with that. The penalties are creative, to say the least. Fines are the most common, calculated by some arcane formula that seems to change depending on how much the guild needs money this month. But fines are boring. The guild prefers public humiliation. You might have to stand outside the guild hall wearing a sign describing your crime. You might have to provide free services to the guild for a month. You might have to parade through town carrying the substandard product you made while the town crier announces your shame. For serious offenses like revealing trade secrets or working outside guild hours, the punishments get medieval, literally. Your tools could be confiscated and publicly broken. Your workshop could be sealed for weeks or months. Your hands could be branded with a mark, identifying you as a rule breaker. In extreme cases, you could be expelled from the guild, which was basically economic death. Without guild membership, you couldn't practice your trade legally anywhere in the city. But the really twisted part was the appeal process. Want to appeal your sentence? Sure, you can appeal to the city magistrate, but the guild will remember that you didn't accept their justice, and they have long memories and creative ways to make your life miserable. Your next inspection will find problems that don't exist. Your apprentices will suddenly all fail their examinations. Your wife will be banned from the market for obscure violations. The message is clear: accept guild justice or suffer guild vengeance. The investigation process for guild crimes was like CSI Medieval Edition, except instead of DNA evidence and forensics, they had hearsay, superstition, and whoever could bribe the most witnesses. When an accusation was made, the guild appointed investigators, usually masters who had nothing better to do and enjoyed drama. These investigators had the power to enter your workshop, examine your books if you had any, question your apprentices, and generally turn your life upside down looking for evidence of wrongdoing. They'd measure your products with the official guild measures, which were kept locked in the guild hall, and were supposedly accurate but probably weren't, because nothing in the medieval world was standardized. Is your cloth a finger's width too short? Fraud. Is your bread 2 grains too light? Theft. Is your silver 0.01% less pure than required? Basically treason. The interrogation of witnesses was an art form. Your apprentices could be questioned separately, and any contradiction in their stories was evidence of guilt. Never mind that one apprentice is 12 and terrified, while the other is drunk and doesn't remember what he had for breakfast. If their stories don't match perfectly, clearly something nefarious is happening. Your competitors would mysteriously remember seeing things they definitely didn't see. That time you worked past sunset 3 months ago, someone saw candlelight. That customer who left satisfied, they actually heard him complaining. That innovative technique you developed, obviously stolen from another master, even though nobody can say which one. The concept of double jeopardy didn't exist. You could be tried multiple times for the same offense if new evidence emerged, and new evidence always emerged when someone powerful wanted it to. Found innocent of using inferior materials, well, now you're being tried for buying those materials from the wrong supplier. Cleared of that? Now it's about storing them improperly. The guild could keep trying until something stuck, and heaven help you if you were a woman trying to practice a craft. Technically, women couldn't be guild members in most places, but widows could sometimes continue their husband's business. The scrutiny they faced was insane. Every single transaction was questioned. Every male employee was suspected of actually running things. Every success was attributed to luck or improper influence. The moment a widow showed any competence, the guild would find reasons to shut her down or force her to marry another guild member. The surveillance network was impressive. Guild members were encouraged to report violations, and by encouraged I mean rewarded with a percentage of any fines collected. Your neighbor could make a month's wages by reporting that you worked on a saint's day. Your competitor could fund his next expansion by proving you used a non-guild supplier. Everyone was watching everyone, all the time. Even your own household could betray you. Servants could be bribed or threatened into testifying. Your wife might be pressured to reveal your business secrets. Your children could be questioned about what they saw in the workshop. The guild had ways of making people talk, usually involving threats to their livelihood rather than their body, though sometimes the distinction was academic. The actual trial was theatre of the absurd. You'd present your defense, which usually consisted of character witnesses swearing you were an upstanding guild member who would never break the rules, while everyone knew you absolutely broke the rules because everyone broke the rules. The guild's rules were so comprehensive and contradictory that full compliance was literally impossible. Work on every feast day was forbidden, but there were so many feast days that not working on all of them meant bankruptcy. Prices were fixed, but materials costs fluctuated, so you either lost money or broke the price rules. You had to use guild suppliers, but guild suppliers didn't always have what you needed, so you either failed to fulfill orders or bought elsewhere. The system was designed to make everyone guilty of something. Your defense might include bringing in your own products to demonstrate quality, calling witnesses to your character, or if you were desperate, invoking divine judgment. Trial by ordeal wasn't common by this period, but some guilds still used oath helping, where you'd swear your innocence and get others to swear they believed you. The more oath helpers you could produce, the more likely you were to be believed. Of course, oath helpers expected reciprocity, so you'd end up owing favors to half the guild. If found guilty, the sentencing was public and humiliating. You'd stand before the assembled guild while the master read out your crimes in detail, your punishment, and a lecture about maintaining guild standards that everyone had heard 100 times before. The punishment would be recorded in the guild book, a permanent record of your shame that would be referenced whenever you stepped out of line again. The financial penalties could be crushing. Beyond the official fine, there were court costs, fees for the investigators, compensation for the accuser's time, and donations to the guild's patron saint, because apparently even the saints needed to be paid off. You might also have to pay for a feast of reconciliation, where you'd literally buy dinner for the people who just convicted you. But the social penalties were worse. Being convicted of a guild crime marked you as unreliable. Customers would think twice before buying from you. Other masters would be reluctant to associate with you. Your apprentices might be refused advancement. Your daughters might find it harder to marry well. The stain of conviction could affect your family for generations. The appeals process, if you dared use it, involved taking your case to the city magistrate or even the king's court, but this meant challenging the guild's authority, and guilds didn't forgive or forget. Win your appeal and you'd still lose, because the guild would make your life so miserable, you'd wish you'd just accepted the original punishment. They'd find new violations, create new rules specifically to target you, or simply make it impossible for you to work through constant harassment and inspection. Some masters became serial offenders, constantly in trouble with the guild, but somehow surviving through a combination of bribes, political connections, and sheer stubbornness. These rogues were simultaneously admired and despised, heroes to some for standing up to guild authority, pariahs to others for threatening the system that protected everyone's interests. The truly clever masters learned to game the system. They'd commit their violations through intermediaries who couldn't be traced back to them. They'd maintain perfect compliance in visible areas while breaking rules where nobody could see. They'd cultivate relationships with guild officials, ensuring that any investigations would be cursory at best. The guild justice system was ultimately about control, not justice. It maintained the power structure, enriched the guild treasury, and reminded everyone that stepping out of line had consequences. It was arbitrary, corrupt, and unfair, but it was also the only system available. Without guild membership and protection, you had nothing. So you played along, paid your fines, attended your trials, and pretended the system made sense. Let's talk about the international guild networks. The medieval equivalent of multinational corporations meets the mafia meets LinkedIn Premium. While you were struggling to make ends meet in your local guild, the big boys were playing a completely different game, one that spanned continents and shaped empires. The Hanseatic League was the Amazon of its day, if Amazon controlled its own army and navy. This wasn't just a trade guild, it was basically a sovereign entity made up of merchant guilds from dozens of cities across Northern Europe. They had their own laws, their own military forces, and their own diplomatic corps. They negotiated with kings as equals, and sometimes as superiors. Imagine your local merchants association having nuclear weapons, and you get the idea. These merchant princes didn't deal in single items like your local goldsmith. They dealt in bulk goods that entire kingdoms depended on. Grain from Prussia, furs from Russia, wool from England, wine from France, spices from the Orient. They controlled the supply chains so thoroughly that they could starve entire cities into submission just by redirecting trade routes. If they didn't like your city's policies, they'd simply stop trading there and watch your economy collapse faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The communication network they built was insane for the time. While local guilds were still using town criers and hoping messages arrived eventually, the Hanseatic League had a system of couriers, ships, and trading posts that could relay information across Europe in weeks instead of months. They knew about price fluctuations in Constantinople before most people knew Constantinople existed. They had market intelligence that modern corporations would kill for, all maintained through handwritten letters and an iron grip on information flow. But the real power was in their standardization systems. Every Hanseatic city used the same weights, measures, and quality standards. A barrel of herring in Bergen was exactly the same as a barrel of herring in London, down to the number of fish and the amount of salt. This might sound boring, but it was revolutionary. It meant you could trade without seeing the goods, trust without verification, and build business relationships that spanned thousands of miles. They created the first international commercial law that actually worked. If a merchant from Lubeck cheated a merchant from Novgorod, there was an actual legal process that both cities recognized and enforced. They had commercial courts that operated above local law, judges who specialized in international trade disputes, and enforcement mechanisms that could destroy a merchant's career across an entire continent. Break a contract in Hamburg, and you'd find yourself blacklisted in Stockholm, London, and Bruges before the month was out. The banking guilds of Italy were playing an even more sophisticated game. The Medici didn't just move money, they created money. They invented financial instruments that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 20th century. Letters of credit that could be drawn on banks thousands of miles away. Currency exchanges that circumvented church usury laws through clever accounting that would make modern tax lawyers weep with joy. Insurance schemes that spread risk across multiple ventures so that one shipwreck didn't mean total ruin. The Italian banking guilds turned money movement into an art form. While your local guild was still arguing about whether charging interest was a sin, the Florentine bankers had figured out 12 different ways to charge interest without calling it interest. They called it exchange fees, risk premiums, administrative costs, anything but interest, because officially Christians couldn't charge Christians interest. But somehow, everyone was getting rich. These weren't just banks, they were intelligence networks. The Medici Bank had branches in 16 major cities, each one staffed with agents who weren't just counting coins. They were gathering intelligence on local politics, military movements, crop yields, anything that might affect trade. A Medici agent in London would know about a potential war with France before the English Parliament did, because that information was worth more than gold if you knew how to use it. The guild networks also controlled technology transfer in ways that would make modern patent lawyers jealous. The Venetian glassmakers didn't just protect their secrets, they created an entire prison island to keep them. Merino wasn't just where glass was made, it was where glassmakers were trapped. Try to leave with trade secrets, and you'd find yourself hunted across Europe by guild assassins. Yes, assassins. These weren't your friendly neighborhood craftsmen anymore. When millions of florins were at stake, guilds played for keeps. The silk guilds of Lucca had an even more elaborate system. They didn't just control production, they controlled the entire supply chain from silkworm to finished fabric. They had agents in Constantinople buying raw silk, ships to transport it, workshops to process it, and merchants to sell it. Every step was controlled by guild members who swore oaths of secrecy that made modern NDAs look like casual suggestions. Break those oaths, and you wouldn't just lose your job, you'd lose your hands, your property, and possibly your life. Information was the real currency of these international guilds. The Fuggers of Augsburg built a banking empire not just on money, but on the fastest private postal system in Europe. They had couriers who could get information from Venice to Antwerp in 7 days when normal post took 3 weeks. That meant they knew about price changes, political upheavals, and military defeats, while their competitors were still operating on month-old information. They used this advantage to corner markets, manipulate prices, and basically print money. The spice guilds operated on an even grander scale. The Venetian spice traders didn't just buy and sell pepper and cinnamon, they funded expeditions to find new routes to Asia, sabotaged competitors' ships, and maintained a network of spies in every major port from Alexandria to Amsterdam. They knew which ships were sailing, what they were carrying, and when they'd arrive, they could buy up entire harvests before competitors knew the ships had left port, corner markets before anyone realized there was a shortage, and crash prices when rivals had overextended themselves. The really fascinating part about these international guild networks was how they handled different cultures and religions. Christian guilds trading with Muslim merchants in Alexandria, Jewish bankers facilitating transactions between both, and somehow everyone making money, despite supposedly hating each other. The guilds created a commercial lingua franca that transcended religious and cultural boundaries. A bill of exchange was valid, whether written by a Christian, Muslim, or Jew, as long as it had the right seals and signatures. But don't think this was some medieval utopia of tolerance. The guilds were absolutely ruthless about maintaining their monopolies. The Hanseatic League once went to war with Denmark over herring rights. Actual war with ships and soldiers and dead people over fish. The Italian city-states regularly fought wars that were basically hostile corporate takeovers with armies. When Pisa competed too successfully with Genoa, Genoa literally destroyed Pisa's port, filling it with rocks and dirt, so ships could never dock there again. That's commitment to eliminating competition. The guild networks also pioneered industrial espionage. Guild spies would infiltrate competitors' workshops, seduce secrets out of masters' daughters, bribe apprentices for information, and steal actual products to reverse engineer them. The English spent decades trying to steal Italian silk-making techniques, finally succeeding by basically kidnapping Italian craftsmen and forcing them to teach their methods. When that's your business model, hostile takeover has a whole different meaning. These international guilds also shaped exploration and colonization. The merchant guilds funded Columbus, not out of scientific curiosity, but because they wanted to cut out the middlemen in the spice trade. The Portuguese exploration of Africa was driven by gold traders looking for direct access to West African gold mines. The entire age of exploration was basically venture capitalism, with boats and a disturbing lack of ethics. The communication methods these guilds developed were revolutionary. They created codes and ciphers to protect trade secrets, developed standardized commercial languages that could be understood across linguistic boundaries, and established protocols for verifying authentic messages that would be familiar to any modern cryptographer. A merchant in Venice could send encoded instructions to an agent in London, knowing that even if the message was intercepted, competitors couldn't read it. The financial innovations were even more impressive. The guilds created the first real international monetary system. They standardized exchange rates, created reliable conversion tables, and established trusted currencies that could be used across borders. The Florentine florin became the dollar of its day, accepted everywhere because everyone trusted the guild that backed it. They invented deposit banking, where you could deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another, centuries before ATMs or wire transfers. The guild networks also dealt with risk in sophisticated ways. They created the first real insurance markets, where multiple guilds would share the risk of a trading voyage. They developed actuarial tables that calculated the odds of a ship being lost to pirates, storms, or fraud. They created financial derivatives that let merchants hedge against price fluctuations, currency changes, and political upheavals. These weren't your local craftsmen trying to make a living. These were financial engineers creating the architecture of modern capitalism. Now we need to talk about the dark underbelly of the guild system, the violence, corruption, and outright criminality that everyone pretended didn't exist, but absolutely defined how things really worked. You think modern corporations played dirty? These medieval guilds would eat them alive and use their bones for bookbinding. Let's start with the enforcement mechanisms. When I say guilds protected their monopolies, I don't mean strongly worded letters and legal threats. I mean actual violence. Guild enforcers, essentially medieval muscle, would visit anyone who dared operate outside the system. That baker selling bread without guild membership. His oven gets mysteriously destroyed at night. That weaver using non-guild wool, her loom ends up in the river. And if you were really stubborn, well, accidents happened. People fell off bridges, got trampled by horses, or simply disappeared. The guilds had their own gangs, though they'd never call them that. They were protective associations, or market regulators, or quality inspectors. But everyone knew what they really were: organized crime with better documentation. These enforcers would patrol markets, checking that every seller was guild approved, every product properly marked, every price within guild limits. Step out of line and you'd get a warning. Ignore the warning and things got medieval, which in the medieval period meant really, really bad. The protection racket was sophisticated. Pay your guild dues and you got protection from theft, fraud, and competition. Don't pay, and suddenly thieves knew exactly when you'd be traveling with valuable goods. Competitors would undercut your prices with guild backing. Customers would mysteriously stop coming. The guild didn't have to explicitly threaten you. The threat was built into the system. Inter-guild warfare was common and brutal. The skinners and the tanners might go to war over who had the right to process certain types of leather. These weren't metaphorical wars. We're talking actual street battles with clubs, knives, and occasionally more creative weapons. The Great Butcher-Baker War of 1267 in London saw running battles through the streets, multiple deaths, and the military having to intervene, all over who could sell meat pies. The corruption was systemic. Guild masters took bribes to fast-track apprentices, overlook quality violations, and assign the best contracts to their friends. Elections were bought with promises of reduced dues, better feast allocations, and looking the other way on certain irregularities. The guild treasury was regularly plundered for personal expenses disguised as guild business. That new guild hall renovation, half the money went into the master's pocket. Those quality inspections, pay the right price and your substandard goods passed with flying colors. The sexual exploitation was horrific but completely normalized. Masters had almost complete power over their apprentices, and frequently abused it. Female servants in guild households were particularly vulnerable. The master's wife might protect them, or she might look the other way to keep peace in the household. Journeymen were known to assault female workers in other crafts, knowing the guild would protect them if they were valuable enough. And if a woman complained, she was a troublemaker, a liar, probably a witch. The guild protected its own. The blackmail and extortion operations run by guilds would make modern organized crime families take notes. Guild officials had dirt on everyone because everyone was breaking some rule somewhere. Maybe you worked an hour past sunset last Tuesday. Maybe your wife sold some cloth without proper guild approval. Maybe your apprentice was seen in a tavern when he should have been at Vespers. All of this information was carefully collected, filed and used when necessary. Cross the wrong guild official, and suddenly every minor infraction you'd committed in the past decade would come to light. The investigations would be thorough, public and humiliating. Your competitors would be encouraged to remember any other violations they might have witnessed. Your apprentices would be questioned separately until one of them cracked and admitted to something, anything, to make the questioning stop. The fines would pile up until you were bankrupt or agreed to whatever the guild wanted. Murder within the guild system was more common than anyone wanted to admit. Not random violence, but calculated elimination of problems. That master who was pushing for reform, found dead in an alley, clearly robbed by brigands. The journeyman who knew too much about the guild master's embezzlement, tragic accident at the construction site. The widow who was too successful and making the male masters look bad, food poisoning, so unfortunate, these things happen. The city authorities usually looked the other way because the guilds were too powerful to challenge and too important to the economy to disrupt. The guilds had their own justice system for internal disputes, and they preferred to handle things quietly. A dead body was bad for business, but a live troublemaker was worse. So problems got solved, permanently, and everyone pretended not to notice the pattern. The sabotage between competing guilds was constant and creative. The brewers might poison the baker's yeast supply. The blacksmiths might provide the carpenters with deliberately brittle nails. The dyers might contaminate the weaver's water supply. All of this was illegal, of course, but proving it was nearly impossible. The guilds had alibis, witnesses, and enough money to make investigations disappear. Even within guilds, masters sabotaged each other constantly. That competitor getting too successful. Maybe his apprentice gets arrested for theft, with stolen goods conveniently found in his possession. That master who bid lower on the cathedral contract. His workshop catches fire, so tragic. These wooden buildings are such fire hazards. The master who's been speaking against you in guild meetings. His wife gets anonymous letters about his visits to the brothel, and suddenly he's too busy with domestic problems to cause trouble. The fraud was endemic. Masters would stamp inferior products with guild marks, sell foreign goods as local production, dilute expensive materials with cheap substitutes. The gold wasn't pure, the wine was watered, the cloth was short, and everyone knew it, but nobody could prove it without risking their own secrets being exposed. Customers were routinely cheated, but had no recourse because the guild investigated its own members and surprisingly always found them innocent. The child labor exploitation in the guild system was horrifying even by medieval standards. While apprenticeships were supposedly educational, Many masters used apprentices as nothing more than slave labor. Children as young as 7 were taken in as pre-apprentices, supposedly to learn basic skills, but really to do the worst jobs for no pay. They cleaned privies, hauled water, tended fires, and basically did everything that was too degrading for even regular apprentices. These children had no rights, no protection, and no recourse if abused. The guild would always side with the master because children had no standing to bring complaints. If a child died from overwork, malnutrition, or accident, it was unfortunate but not unexpected. The master might pay a small fine to the parents if they were citizens, nothing if they were poor. Another child would be in the workshop within days. The financial crimes were sophisticated for the era. Masters would take deposits for work they never intended to complete, then claim the customer had violated the contract. They'd use different weights for buying and selling, claiming it was measurement error when caught. They'd substitute materials after contracts were signed, delivering lead disguised as pewter, brass as gold, dog leather as calfskin. The guild's monopoly meant customers had nowhere else to go, so they either accepted the fraud or went without. Money laundering through the guild system was common. Stolen goods would be remarked with guild stamps and sold as legitimate products. Bribes would be disguised as guild dues or feast contributions. Protection money would be collected as quality inspection fees. The guild books, when they existed, were creative fiction that would make Enron's accountants impressed. Everyone knew the books were fraudulent, but as long as the right people got paid, nobody cared. The religious corruption was particularly cynical. Guilds were supposedly religious organizations, dedicated to their patron saints and good Christian values. In reality, they used religion as cover for their crimes. Guild meetings started with prayers and ended with planning monopolistic practices. They funded religious plays while running protection rackets. They marched in religious processions by day and sent enforcers to break legs by night. The church looked the other way because guilds were major donors. The exploitation of foreign workers was systematic. Journeymen from other cities were tolerated when labor was needed, but expelled the moment work dried up. Foreign craftsmen were charged higher guild fees, given worse assignments, and blamed for any problems. During plague years or economic downturns, foreign guild members would be accused of bringing disease or stealing jobs, leading to riots that the local guild would sadly deplore while benefiting from reduced competition. The pension fraud was creative. Guilds supposedly provided for elderly members who could no longer work, but this support was contingent on complete loyalty throughout their career. Cross the guild once, even decades ago, and your pension disappeared. Masters would find reasons to deny pensions, claiming the member hadn't paid full dues, had violated obscure rules, or wasn't actually unable to work. Meanwhile, guild officials drew multiple pensions under various pretexts while elderly craftsmen starved. The entire system was built on violence, intimidation, and corruption, dressed up in religious ceremony and claims of protecting quality and tradition. It was organized crime with a royal charter, the mafia with better record keeping, a protection racket that lasted for centuries and shaped the entire medieval economy. But hey, at least they produced some really nice stuff when they weren't busy extorting, murdering, and defrauding everyone in sight. Let's examine what happened when the plague hit and the guild system faced its first real existential crisis. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it shattered the entire economic and social structure that guilds depended on. Between 1347 and 1351, Europe lost somewhere between 30 and 60% of its population. Imagine half your co-workers just gone, and you start to understand what happened to the guild system. The initial response from guilds was denial, mixed with opportunism. As members started dying, the surviving masters immediately moved to claim their workshops, tools, and most importantly, their customers. The guild halls became clearinghouses for death, with masters literally waiting outside dying colleagues' homes to claim their assets the moment they expired. The official guild response was to maintain standards and procedures. Even as the world collapsed around them, they still held meetings. Though half the seats were empty, they still demanded proper apprenticeships, though there weren't enough people left to fill them. They still tried to maintain price controls, though the economy had gone completely insane. It was like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, if the Titanic was also on fire and being attacked by sea monsters. The labor shortage that followed was catastrophic for the guild system. Suddenly, apprentices had power. They could demand better treatment, better food, even wages, because if a master didn't treat them well, they could literally walk next door and find another master desperate for workers. The 7-year apprenticeship, forget it. Masters were graduating apprentices in 3 years, 2 years, sometimes months, just to have enough hands to meet demand. Journeymen became kings of the economy. They could demand wages that would have been unthinkable before the plague. They could pick and choose their masters, work when they wanted, leave when they wanted. The entire power structure flipped overnight. Masters who had spent decades building their authority suddenly found themselves begging 20-something journeymen to please come work for them, and bringing their own wine would be appreciated. The guilds tried to maintain control through increasingly desperate measures. They petitioned kings for laws fixing wages at pre-plague levels. They tried to force journeymen to work for specific masters. They attempted to prevent workers from moving between cities. None of it worked. When half your workforce is dead, the surviving half has leverage that no law can overcome. The quality standards that guilds had maintained for centuries collapsed. There simply weren't enough skilled workers to maintain them. Masterpieces that would have been rejected instantly before the plague were approved because the guild needed members. Apprentices who could barely hold a hammer were declared journeymen. Journeymen who had been working for maybe a year were fast-tracked to master status. The craft knowledge that had been carefully preserved and passed down was being lost in real time. The social upheaval caused by the plague turned the guild system into a battlefield. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England wasn't just about taxes and serfdom. It was also about guild monopolies and the attempt to maintain pre-plague economic controls. When Wat Tyler and his rebels entered London, they didn't just target nobles, they went after guild halls, destroying records, burning charters, and killing guild masters who had tried to keep wages low while prices soared. The surviving guild members responded with their own violence. They formed militia units, supposedly to maintain order, but really to protect their interests. Guild armies fought pitched battles, with workers demanding better conditions. The Citiompi revolt in Florence saw wool workers literally take over the city government, forcing the guilds to accept them as members and share power. It took years of violence and political maneuvering for the traditional guilds to regain control, and they never forgot the humiliation. The demographic catastrophe created bizarre situations. Entire guilds simply ceased to exist because all their members died. The specialized knowledge they held, techniques developed over centuries, vanished in a matter of months. Other guilds suddenly found themselves with monopolies they couldn't fulfill. The only 3 remaining blacksmiths in a city couldn't possibly meet demand, but they also couldn't train apprentices fast enough because proper training took years they didn't have. Women suddenly had opportunities that had been denied for centuries. With so many male craftsmen dead, widows didn't just continue their husbands' businesses, they expanded them. Some cities saw women admitted to guilds as full members for the first time, not out of progressiveness, but out of desperate necessity. Of course, the moment the population started recovering, the guilds immediately moved to push women out again, but for a brief period, The workshop wasn't exclusively male. The religious response from guilds was schizophrenic. Some blamed the plague on moral failures and instituted even stricter religious observances. Others abandoned religious pretense entirely, focusing on survival and profit. Guild-sponsored religious plays became death-obsessed, featuring graphic depictions of hell and damnation. The cheerful mystery plays of earlier centuries were replaced by grim morality tales, warning of divine punishment for those who violated guild rules. The economic innovations that emerged from this crisis were revolutionary. Guilds that survived did so by adapting in ways that would have been heretical before the plague. They started accepting partial training, recognizing that someone who knew 70% of the craft was better than no one at all. They created accelerated programs for promising apprentices. They even began accepting foreign-trained craftsmen without requiring them to complete new apprenticeships. The psychological impact of the plague on guild culture was profound and lasting. The masters who survived developed a siege mentality that shaped guild policies for generations. They had seen their entire world collapse and were determined to prevent it from happening again, even if their prevention methods were completely irrational. The new obsession with purity, both physical and professional, was intense. Guilds instituted health inspections that were basically superstition disguised as medicine. No one with visible disease could enter guild halls. Anyone who coughed during a meeting was expelled. Some guilds required members to prove they hadn't traveled to infected areas, even decades after the plague had passed. The documentation requirements became insane as guilds tried to track every member, apprentice, and transaction in case another plague hit. The hoarding mentality that developed was economically destructive, but psychologically understandable. Guilds started stockpiling everything: raw materials, finished goods, money, even food. Guild halls became fortresses filled with supplies for disasters that might never come. This hoarding created artificial shortages that drove prices up, leading to more resentment from customers who were also trying to recover from losing half their families. The generational conflict between pre-plague and post-plague guild members was vicious. The old guard who had survived clung to traditional methods and hierarchies. The new members who had been fast-tracked through the system had different ideas about everything. They had seen the old system fail catastrophically and had no reverence for traditions that hadn't prevented disaster. Guild meetings became battlegrounds between these factions, sometimes literally, with brawls breaking out over proposed changes. The reform movements that emerged were radical for their time. Some journeymen formed their own alternative guilds, refusing to recognize traditional master authority. These compagnonnages in France and Vereinigung in Germany were basically labor unions centuries before the Industrial Revolution. They organized strikes, coordinated wage demands across cities, and maintained their own networks outside guild control. The traditional guilds responded with violence, bribes to authorities, and religious condemnation, but the cat was out of the bag. The psychological trauma manifested in bizarre guild rituals. Initiation ceremonies became more elaborate and often cruel, as if suffering would somehow protect against future catastrophe. Some guilds instituted annual plague commemorations where they would reenact the dying times, complete with members playing corpses. Others developed elaborate cleansing rituals that had to be performed before any guild business: washing hands in wine, burning specific herbs, reciting prayers that were more like incantations. The record-keeping became obsessive. Where pre-plague guilds might have kept basic membership rolls and financial records, post-plague guilds documented everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every decision, recorded in minute detail, as if documentation could somehow prevent another collapse. These records, where they survive, show a society traumatized and desperately trying to maintain control through bureaucracy. The legacy of the Plague Years fundamentally changed how guilds operated. They became simultaneously more rigid in their rules and more flexible in their enforcement, more paranoid about outsiders and more desperate for members, more religious in their rhetoric and more cynical in their operations. The confident, stable guild system of the early 14th century never returned. What emerged was a wounded, defensive, increasingly irrelevant institution that would limp along for centuries, gradually losing power to new economic forces it couldn't understand or control. The fall of the guild system wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was a slow-motion collapse that took centuries, like watching a massive building crumble one brick at a time, while the people inside insisted everything was fine. The Renaissance didn't kill the guilds, but it started the infection that would eventually prove fatal. The Renaissance brought new ideas about individualism, innovation, and market economics that were completely incompatible with guild philosophy. Humanist thinkers started questioning why birth and connections mattered more than talent. Why should a brilliant craftsman be kept from master status because he couldn't afford the fees? Why should innovation be suppressed to protect established masters? These weren't new questions, but now they were being asked by people with printing presses. The printing press itself was a perfect example of how technology would destroy guild control. Scribes' guilds had controlled written information for centuries. Suddenly, one machine could produce more books in a day than a scribe could in a year. The scribes tried to ban printing, regulate it, control it, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with their bare hands. Within decades, printed books were everywhere, and the Scribes Guild was basically an expensive social club for people who did calligraphy as a hobby. The Protestant Reformation hit guilds from another angle. Many guilds were deeply tied to Catholic religious practices, their patron saints, their feast days, their entire identity wrapped up in Catholic tradition. When Protestant regions started banning saint worship and religious processions, guilds lost a major source of their authority and social function. Protestant work ethic also challenged the guild system of fixed hours and mandatory religious holidays. Why shouldn't a craftsman work on St. Crispin's Day if he wanted to? The rise of capitalism and banking created alternative power structures that guilds couldn't control. The Medici and Fuggers didn't need guild approval to move money and influence markets. They could fund workshops outside guild structures, import goods that competed with guild products, and basically ignore guild regulations because they had more money and power than entire guild networks. When your banker has the ear of the Pope and the Emperor, your local guild charter looks pretty pathetic. Global trade destroyed guild monopolies in ways they couldn't have imagined. When Portuguese ships started bringing spices directly from India, the medieval spice guilds that had controlled the overland trade were instantly obsolete. When Spanish galleons brought gold from the Americas, it didn't matter what the goldsmiths' guild thought about proper gold working techniques. The world had gotten too big for guild control. The scientific revolution introduced methods and ideas that guild tradition couldn't accommodate. When Galileo pointed his telescope at the sky, he wasn't following guild-approved astronomical procedures. When Harvey described blood circulation, he wasn't respecting the medical guild's ancient wisdom. Innovation was happening outside guild structures, and guilds could either adapt or become irrelevant. Most chose irrelevance. The rise of manufactories and proto-industrial production made guild workshops look like quaint antiques. Why have 50 independent masters each making 2 items a day, when you could have one manufactory with 50 workers making 200 items? The math was simple and brutal. Guild quality standards meant nothing when customers could buy adequate products for a quarter of the price. The guilds tried to fight back by emphasizing their superior quality, but most customers didn't care if their nails were hand-forged by a master when machine-made nails worked just as well. The geographic discoveries and colonial expansion created markets and opportunities that existed completely outside guild control. A merchant could sail to the Americas, trade for furs, sugar, or tobacco, and return with wealth that no guild could touch. Colonial workshops operated without guild oversight, producing goods that competed directly with guild products. The guilds tried to get colonial authorities to enforce guild rules, but colonial authorities were too busy getting rich to care about medieval regulations. The military revolution also played a role. Medieval armies had relied on guild-produced weapons and armor, individually crafted pieces that required master artisans. But when armies started needing thousands of muskets, standardized ammunition, and mass-produced uniforms, guild workshops couldn't compete. State arsenals and military contractors operated outside guild control, employing whoever could produce what was needed, regardless of guild membership. The Enlightenment philosophers delivered intellectual death blows to guild philosophy. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations explicitly attacked guild monopolies as impediments to economic progress. The French philosophers mocked guild traditions as medieval superstition, holding back rational progress. These weren't just academic arguments, they shaped how educated elites thought about economics, and these elites were increasingly the ones making policy. The French Revolution was probably the most dramatic single blow to the guild system. In 1791, the Le Chapelier law abolished all guilds in France overnight. Centuries of tradition, privilege, and power structures were declared illegal. The revolutionaries saw guilds as part of the corrupt old regime that needed to be swept away. Liberty, equality, and fraternity didn't include the right to monopolize shoemaking. Other countries watched France and started their own guild reforms. The Holy Roman Empire dissolved guilds in 1806. England had been gradually stripping guild powers for decades. By the early 19th century, guilds in most of Europe were either abolished or reduced to ceremonial organizations with no real power. The Industrial Revolution delivered the final blow. When a single factory could produce more textiles in a day than all the guild weavers in a city could produce in a month, the game was over. Steam power, mechanization, and mass production made craft guilds as obsolete as sundials in the age of atomic clocks. But guilds didn't go quietly into the night. They fought every change, every innovation, every challenge to their authority with desperate creativity. They lobbied parliaments, bribed officials, organized boycotts, and occasionally resorted to good old-fashioned violence. The Luddites smashing machinery weren't just random workers, many were guild members watching their entire way of life being destroyed by mechanical looms. The transition from guild system to industrial capitalism was brutal for those caught in it. Masters who had spent decades building their businesses watched them become worthless overnight. Journeymen who had trained for years found their skills obsolete. Apprentices discovered their 7-year contracts were preparing them for jobs that no longer existed. Entire families that had been in the same guild for generations suddenly had no identity, no purpose, no future. Some guilds tried to adapt, transforming themselves into what we would recognize as trade unions or professional associations. They stopped trying to control production and focused on protecting workers' rights, maintaining professional standards, and providing mutual aid. The successful ones survived by completely abandoning their medieval origins and embracing modern organizational methods. Others became purely social organizations, maintaining elaborate traditions and ceremonies but having no economic function. Today's livery companies in London are perfect examples, ancient guilds that still exist, still have their halls and traditions, but whose members are bankers and lawyers rather than actual goldsmiths or fishmongers. They're historical reenactment societies with really good real estate portfolios. The legacy of the guild system lived on in unexpected ways. Labor unions adopted guild tactics of collective bargaining and mutual support. Professional associations maintained guild ideas of standardized training and certification. Even modern corporations with their hierarchies, apprenticeship programs which they call internships, and industry associations are recognizable descendants of medieval guilds. The cultural impact persisted too. The idea that certain professions require long training periods, that masters should train apprentices, that professional standards should be maintained, all of these are guild concepts that we've internalized so completely we don't even question them. When medical schools require years of training and residency, they're following a guild model. When bar associations control who can practice law, they're acting like medieval guilds. The guild system's death was also its transformation. The rigid, monopolistic, tradition-bound medieval guild died, but its DNA survived in the organizations that replaced it. Workers still organize collectively, professions still maintain standards, knowledge is still passed from master to student. The forms changed, but the fundamental human needs that created guilds, security, identity, quality control, and economic power, those never went away. Looking back, the guild system seems simultaneously admirable and appalling. They created the first real middle class, maintained quality standards, provided social security, and preserved technical knowledge through centuries of chaos. They also stifled innovation, perpetuated inequality, used violence to maintain monopolies, and held back economic development for their own benefit. They were, in short, utterly human organizations, capable of both greatness and terrible abuse of power. So what can we actually learn from medieval guilds in our modern, interconnected digital world? Turns out, quite a lot. And some of it is uncomfortably relevant. The guild system was essentially the first attempt at regulating the gig economy, standardizing remote work, and creating professional networks. They just did it with parchment and violence instead of apps and lawsuits. Look at modern tech companies creating walled gardens where only approved developers can operate, and you're seeing guild monopolies with better PR. Apple's App Store is basically a guild hall, where you pay your dues 30% commission, submit to quality inspection app review, and follow the rules or get expelled. The only difference is that medieval guilds at least pretended to be religious organizations. Apple just pretends to be thinking different. The modern obsession with certifications and credentials is pure guild thinking. Why does a barista need a certificate to pour coffee? Why do hair braiders need licenses? Why does someone need a degree to do a job they could learn in 6 months? Because we've inherited the guild mentality that controlling access to professions protects both practitioners and consumers. Sometimes it does, sometimes it just protects established players from competition, exactly like medieval guilds intended. The gig economy platforms like Uber, Airbnb, and DoorDash are essentially anti-guilds, breaking down traditional barriers to entry. But watch what happens as they mature. They start implementing quality standards, rating systems, preferred provider programs. They're slowly recreating guild structures because those structures solved real problems, like how do you ensure quality when you can't personally verify every provider? How do you build trust in distributed systems? The medieval guilds figured this out with marks and seals. We do it with stars and reviews. Professional networking sites like LinkedIn are digital guild halls. You display your credentials, get endorsements from other members, join professional groups, and use connections to find opportunities. The only thing missing is the requirement to buy everyone dinner when you level up, though given how much LinkedIn Premium costs, maybe that's included. The guild system's approach to knowledge transfer is fascinating in our age of YouTube tutorials and online courses. Guilds understood that real expertise requires mentorship, practice, and gradual increase in responsibility. You can't become a master craftsman by watching videos. You need someone to correct your mistakes, share tricks that aren't written down, and gradually trust you with harder tasks. Modern apprenticeship programs, coding boot camps with mentorship components, and medical residencies all recognize this truth that guilds knew centuries ago. The guild system's biggest failure, trying to stop innovation to protect existing members, is playing out right now in dozens of industries. Taxi companies trying to ban Uber, hotels fighting Airbnb, traditional universities dismissing online education. It's the same script the guilds followed. Protect the established players, maintain quality standards which conveniently require massive capital investment, and claim it's all for consumer protection. Sometimes it is. Sometimes a guild standard preventing random people from performing surgery is actually good. But often it's just protectionism dressed up as public service. The collapse of the guild system also shows what happens when technological change outpaces institutional adaptation. Guilds had centuries to adapt to printing, global trade, and industrialization. They chose to fight instead of evolve, and they lost everything. Watch traditional institutions today making the same mistake with digital transformation, and you can almost hear the echo of guild masters insisting that machine-made products will never match handcrafted quality while their customers are already buying from Amazon. The social functions of guilds, providing identity, community, and mutual support, are desperately needed in our atomized modern world. People are lonely, disconnected, and searching for meaning. The guilds gave members identity. Goldsmith wasn't just a job, it was who you were. They provided community through mandatory meetings and feast days. They offered security through mutual aid funds. We've gained individual freedom, but lost collective support structures. Modern co-working spaces, professional associations, and even online communities are trying to recreate what guilds provided. The difference is that guild membership was mandatory and lifelong, while modern associations are voluntary and fluid. We can join and leave at will, which gives us freedom, but reduces the depth of connection and mutual obligation. The guild approach to quality control through reputation and collective responsibility has interesting parallels to modern platform economics. When every product carried the maker's mark and guild seal, reputation was everything. One bad product could destroy a career. Today's eBay sellers, Etsy craftspeople, and Amazon merchants live by the same rules. Your ratings are your reputation, and reputation is everything. The difference is that guilds controlled the entire system, while modern platforms are controlled by corporations with their own agendas. The monopolistic practices of guilds are also eerily familiar. When a few companies control entire industries, when professional associations restrict entry to maintain wages, when regulations conveniently favor established players, we're seeing guild economics in modern dress. The difference is that medieval guilds were at least local and personal. You knew the guild master screwing you over. Today's monopolists are faceless corporations operating through algorithms. Perhaps the most relevant lesson from the guild system is about the balance between innovation and stability, between individual freedom and collective security. Guilds provided incredible stability and security for their members, but at the cost of stifling innovation and limiting opportunity. Our modern system encourages innovation and provides opportunity, but offers little stability or security. Neither extreme seems optimal. The guild system also demonstrates the danger of regulatory capture, when the people supposed to be regulated control the regulations. Medieval guilds wrote their own rules, judged their own members, and, unsurprisingly, those rules benefited established members at everyone else's expense. Watch any modern professional association or industry group lobby for regulations, and you'll see the same pattern. The rules always seem to protect existing players while making entry harder for newcomers. The transformation of guilds from economic powerhouses to social clubs is a cautionary tale for any organization. They became so focused on protecting their traditions and privileges that they forgot their actual purpose. When the world changed, they couldn't adapt because adaptation would mean abandoning the very things they'd spent centuries building. How many modern institutions are following the same path, maintaining elaborate structures and traditions that no longer serve their original purpose? But here's the thing that really matters. The guild system, for all its flaws, was a human attempt to solve human problems. How do we ensure quality? How do we transfer knowledge? How do we provide security? How do we build trust? These problems haven't gone away just because we have smartphones and satellites. We're still trying to solve them, just with different tools. The medieval guild member transported to today would recognize so much. The contract worker juggling multiple gigs is just a journeyman with a laptop. The LinkedIn influencer building their personal brand is just a master craftsman displaying their work. The boot camp graduate hoping to break into tech is just an apprentice seeking a master. The forms change, but the fundamental challenges remain. So what's the takeaway from our dive into medieval guilds? Maybe it's that human organizational patterns are remarkably consistent across centuries. Maybe it's that every solution creates new problems that require new solutions. Maybe it's that power structures always benefit those who create them. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just that humans have always been humans, trying to make a living, seeking security and meaning, building communities and hierarchies, innovating and resisting change, sometimes all at once. The guild system was deeply flawed, often corrupt, frequently violent, and ultimately unsustainable. It was also ingenious, community building, knowledge preserving, and quality focused. It was like all human institutions, a mixed bag of brilliant solutions and terrible mistakes, noble intentions and base corruptions, progressive innovations and reactionary suppressions. As we build our own systems, our own networks, our own ways of organizing work and life, we could do worse than remember the guild workers who came before us. They faced disruption, transformation, and uncertainty just like we do. They made mistakes we can learn from and develop solutions we still use. They were, in the end, just people trying to figure out how to work, live, and thrive in challenging times. Sound familiar? Thanks for joining me on this journey through the medieval guild system. If you made it this far, you're either really interested in medieval history or really good at procrastinating. Either way, I appreciate you. Hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives into history's forgotten corners. Leave a comment about what medieval profession you think you'd actually survive. And remember, next time you complain about your job, at least you're not a medieval apprentice sleeping with the rats and working for bread. Until next time, this has been your guide to the controlled chaos that was medieval guild life. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe be grateful for labor laws. Peace out.